All right. Well, welcome to the Fearless Voices Storytelling Workshop. And I'm really excited about this because storytelling is one of the most important things out there. And actually, it doesn't matter if you are presenting to a room of Toastmasters, if you're presenting to your coworkers, to upper management. Storytelling, I find, is the most effective way to get your message across. And this is why storytelling is, one of those things that if you do it well, you actually build a reputation for being a good storyteller. And I've had the good fortune of actually having the opportunity to present to several different types of audiences. And inevitably, in every single workshop, presentation, or speech that I do, there is a story, because stories is one of those things that people relate to very quickly, and it's stuff that people can digest very quickly as well. So I'm just going to go into what Fearless Voices is. So Fearless Voices is an event that I run quarterly with Sandro. Sandro is the gentleman that's holding the mic in the photo. And what we've done is we've actually created a stage where people in the community get to share their inspirational stories. The one thing I recognized very early on that, Gandhi says it best, be the change you want to see in the world. And what we felt in 2017, at the beginning of 2017, in January specifically of 2017, we felt like there was just too much negativity out there in the media. There was just too much negativity out there in the world because, the Americans had hired a new president, and, there was this, from a media perspective, it just felt very negative. So we decided to put this event together to really lift the spirits of the community. And that's what Fearless Voices is all about. It's all about sharing inspiration. It's about sharing, overcoming adversities, overcoming challenges. And this is what our speakers do. We've had 4 events, actually 5 events that we've run. We run them quarterly. We started in 2017, and our next event is coming up in September. And what we do is we pull people from the community to share their stories. And the stories vary. And you have new Canadians, you have established Canadians who have, talked about transitioning careers and, being let go from work. And these are the stories that I want to hear, because it also helps us recognize the everyday superhero that sits next to us. Every day we go to work, there's somebody who's gone through something, but we don't recognize them as the hero that they are. And this is what Fearless Voices does. It allows people to really stand on stage and tell their superhero story, which is what a fearless story is. So from the perspective of Fearless Voices, a fearless story is 10 minutes in duration. It has some sort of lesson. It teaches the audience something that you've overcome, something that you've achieved. It's also entertaining because it's your personal story. And what I really like about Fearless Voices is every single story is genuine. And this is really what makes the story real and authentic. What a fearless story is not. It is not a sales pitch. It's not just about you. So what I find, and one of the things that I find people struggle with, is they want to get up, they want to tell their story, but it's a delicate balance between sounding arrogant and sounding confident. And what I found with our Fearless Voices audience is they always tell a story from a place that's genuine. As long as it's genuine and you're sharing something authentic, it's not all about you. It's about the lesson and things that you've overcome and how you've done it, which is what makes it great. So it's not arrogant, it's not boring, and it's definitely, you're not preaching to anybody. Because the last thing you want to do is preach to an audience. And I don't know if you guys have ever felt it, but when you're being preached, you kind of turn yourself off and you stop listening. And this is why it's important not to preach through, whether it's a story, a presentation, or anything that you do. Why is it important? And this is, I talked about this very quickly at the beginning. It's because it's part of your legacy. I had the opportunity to meet Robin Sharma just over 20 years ago. And Robin Sharma, if you don't know who he is, he's a leadership trainer, and he's number 1 or number 2 in the world right now. And he teaches people leadership. And he was in the process of launching his book, The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari. At the end of the presentation, when I went up to him to get my book signed, because I purchased his book, he said, John, leave a legacy. And your story is your legacy. And if you think about it, we go through our lives, we go through these things, but we don't share them with people. And we don't give people the opportunity to learn from what we've done. And you think about, your parents, and you think about your parents' parents, they didn't have the internet the way we have it today. And the way they would relay information back to future generations was through stories. So when you get out there and you tell your stories to people, you're leaving a legacy for other people to continue on. Unfortunately, my mom passed away 6 years ago, but there's a whole bunch of stories that I remember she told me growing up that I still remember today. And I relay those stories to, my stepkids and my nephews and nieces so they can continue and take those stories forward. What your stories also do is they help people get through their struggles, and we all go through our struggles, and we think at some moment and at some point we're all alone, but we're not. There's people who've been where we are and they've gotten through it, and it gives us a sense of hope to do that. It can also get you a job. So for those of you that are listening in that are from the zero to hired audience, when you tell a good story, you're telling the other person on the other side of the table that you're able to communicate effectively. And this is why, having a good story and a good story structure will really help you move forward. It opens up opportunities. I know personally for myself, being in front of several different audiences, telling my story to people. And, I have one signature story that I'll share with you guys a little bit later on. It's a one signature story that has opened up so many different opportunities for me. And it's even given me the opportunity to share it with an audience on the other side of the world. Actually, in next month, I'll have the opportunity to share my story with people in Sao Paulo, Brazil, which I think, would have never happened if I didn't get out there and share my story. And it could be your final story. And actually, we've been blessed to have so many great people come on our stage and tell their story. But one of our speakers, she got up on our stage at our very first event in April of 2017, and she told her story about her nephews who have gone through autism. And what ended up happening in the process, she was diagnosed with brain cancer. And she went through the treatments, and she got back on our stage the following year to tell her story about how she's actually gone through it. It just, it's unfortunate. It kind of gives me chills when I think about it. But that was her final speech, because unfortunately the cancer came back and ended up taking, cancer took her away from us this year. And her story was a story that she left for the generations ahead of us. And, it was really interesting to be at her funeral, to hear her words in her memorial from her through her speech, because this is what they ended up playing at her funeral. So, it really, your story could be your final story. And what's that story that you want to leave with the world? Because that's important. So just, think about it. And we don't think about it. We think that we're going to be here forever and we're going to have all these opportunities to keep doing what we're doing, but we don't know that for sure. So, be cognizant of that, be aware of it. And this is why I think it's your responsibility to get out there and tell your story to the world. And when it comes to storytelling, and this is what I really want you guys to take in before we actually get started with the structure. Your story, it's all about what your audience will receive. At the end of the day, you tell your story so somebody can learn something from it. So it's all about your audience. And this is where, it doesn't matter if it's a story or a presentation or a workshop that I'm doing. Everything is about my audience first. And I want to make sure that you walk away. And I even mentioned it before a lot of you hopped on, that it's about you walking away with value. And if you have a question, and I want to make sure I preface it here, if you have a question that you want answered before the end of this workshop, make sure you raise your hand and tell me, ask me your questions, because I want to make sure that you walk away with the answer that you're looking for. When you consider what your audience is going to be receiving, what are they going to receive? How can they use the information? How can they think, act, and feel different? So just these are things to consider when you're putting your story together. I'm trying to move my windows around and I'm having some difficulties. Give me a second. So how can they use the lessons that you learned? How can they act, feel different? And always consider yourself, or try to stand in their shoes. Actually, when I get into a room to do a story or a presentation or a workshop, I actually stand in various parts of the room because I want to see how the room sees me. And it's a great way to really prepare yourself for your presentation. And this I learned from Craig Valentine, who is one of the Toastmasters International Speech Champions. He said, get in their shoes, get into the various parts of the room to see what people see. So consider this. So what we're going to be talking about, actually just a little bit about me before I get into the actual working pieces of this. My story, which is, and for those of you that don't know me, my signature story is about my 2009. I ended up my position and my job ended up being outsourced. And my story was this: I was told in March that I was going to lose my job. My team was going to be let go. And in September, and in the process, we had to transition our work and our functions over to the new vendor. And September was the date that we were all going to be cut. So this is one of my greatest stories, because it's the story that really, it's the story that changed my life. And I'll say this because there was other stuff that was happening in my life that was, also failing, and one of those things was my marriage at the time. And that moment in 2009 changed my life. But it changed my life for the better, because then better things ended up coming out of it. So I'm giving you the short version of this, but 2009, we're told we're going to be let go. We help everybody on the team. And in September of 2009, everybody has a job to go to, including myself. I actually had 2 jobs at the end of it, and I wasn't even looking for work, which was really neat. So what I have in the picture is my book, which is Zero to Hired, which is the book of the 2009 outsourcing story, because really that's where my story led to. Because as I told people about it, people were saying, well, you know what specifically did you do? And we ended up putting that into a book format. And when you think about your story, where will your story lead you? And we all have that story of overcoming something difficult in our lives. And we've all been there. The one thing, I found, and I was really challenged with, and it was really difficult for me at the beginning, was, I don't have a story. Actually, I got somebody. I'm just going to mute. Give me a second here. I'm hearing some noise. Give me a second, everybody. Ooh. Yes, Matthew. I'll answer your question afterwards. Sorry, I'm just trying to find I'm still working through the text, so please bear with me while I get through this. Where are we? We're right here. Oh man. I don't know where. It's going to mute. Okay. Sorry. There we go. Let's get back to this. So my point is, my story ended up opening other opportunities for me. And one of them is, creating a book, creating a podcast, and creating this webinar today. And this is where all my stories have kind of led to. So what we're going to cover today, I'm going to give you a quick overview. So there's going to be 2 components. One is, what are the story elements and what makes a good story? And then we're going to talk about delivery, because this is just as important as, putting your structure together. And what I'm going to do for all of you is I'm going to make sure that I include a copy of this recording. So you don't, there's going to be notes in here that you can take, but you can always go back and watch it afterwards by just clicking on the link. So what makes a good story? And there's 5 elements. And actually this is taken from Craig's program, world-class speakers. Craig Valentine, Toastmaster International speech winner in 1990. Yeah, I think it was 1990 or 1999, sorry. So when he talks about story, there's 5 elements. Actually, there's 8, but I'm going to shrink it down to 5 because I think these are the most important 5 elements. So within every story, you have characters, you have conflicts, you have your cure, you have your change, and you have your close. And I'm going to go through each one of these in detail. So in every story, you have your characters. And usually the main character in your story is either yourself or somebody else. And what I want you to really think about when you tell your story, from whose perspective are you telling it from? Sometimes we go out there, we give speeches and we talk about stories that other people have gone through. A good friend of mine, he loves US presidents. So every speech, or, when he started his public speaking career, he talked about presidents. He talked about Abraham Lincoln. He talked about, Abraham Lincoln was one of his biggest favorite presidents, so he talked about him a lot. And not JFK. JFK was actually one of his other favorites. Roosevelt was one of the presidents that he talked about all the time. So look at the characters in your story. So you're the character, your mentors, your coaches, your family members, your coworkers, or even celebrities or people that are out there that you talk about and people that you admire. I admire Mother Teresa, I admire Gandhi, I admire Gary Vaynerchuk, and I talk about stories, and even like Robin Sharma, I include these people in my stories because these are people that have an impact for me. And I know they can have an impact for others if I just share those stories with them. So when you're starting to outline and structure your story, figure out who are your main characters in your story. If you're working off a personal story, you can start indicating who your characters are, or who your character, because this is going to be important, because what you're going to end up creating is sometimes you're going to have dialogue within your story, and you're going to use those characters to deliver your dialogue. So know who your characters are in your story. I was just working with somebody this week, and we were preparing her story. And in her story, there's 3 phases that she works through. And the characters include herself, but it also includes people that she worked with in a different country, and then people that she worked with when she was here. And then there was a pivotal moment in her story where she got a rejection from somebody. There was a critic who made a comment that, you know, really forced her to reconsider what she was going to do with her life. And that character prompted her to really make that change. And this is why it's important to outline who your characters are, because you want to make sure you have just the right amount of characters to get your message across. And then what you're also going to have, so once you have your characters all outlined, what you're going to look at are the conflicts that exist within your story. I'm trying to move my windows around. Here we go. And within those, you're going to look at the moments where things change. So I talked about the person that I was working with this week, where one of the conflicts that they had was with somebody who challenged them and told them that their language skills weren't good enough. When I go back to my outsourcing story, the moment that changed it all for me was the moment that I was told I was going to lose my job. And you can almost step into my shoes, and you can feel what that's like if you've been there, because it's one of those moments that make you question, why did you do everything you did up until this point if they were just going to let you go? And so you start recognizing the conflicts within your stories, so you can leverage those conflicts, because they're gonna put everything into perspective. Give me a second. I'm still having tech issues here. Sorry, everybody. Hopefully you guys can still hear me. So, and what we found with the Fearless Voices audience, or the Fearless Voices speakers, their conflicts are many, right? So, changes in their life, people who have gone through mental illness. Actually, we had a speaker who talked about contemplating suicide and how he got through it. We've had people who talked about, losing their jobs and what that was like, and how it actually created other opportunities for them. Sorry. There we go. Move this here. And even in some of our storytellers, they talked about how they changed countries and they moved from one country to another to make and create opportunities for themselves. And some people talked about switching careers. So these conflicts are really the pivotal moments within your story, because they're the moments that make you question whether or not you want to keep doing what you're doing. So, think about it. If you go back and you look at your life and you look at your stories that you want to share with other people, what's the story that keeps showing up for you? Or what's the story that really had a big impact for you? When we ask our speakers to apply for the Fearless Voices event, one of the things that we look for is, what's that moment that changed everything for you? And what's the lesson that you learned that you can share with other people? And really, it's identifying that conflict. And one of the things I do when I coach with people is we go through their entire story, and then we find that moment of conflict, because that's what we want to fix. And the fix is the cure. So it's that moment where you say, you know what, I can't take this anymore. I got to change what I'm doing so I can move on to go do something else. But what also happens as part of your cure is your mindset starts to change. And you think about, one of the things I think about all the time is wealth and financial riches. And, how do I break through a poverty mindset into an abundance type of mindset? And, it's the cure is, changing your mindset. And things start to flip, or you have that realization and that awakening that says, hey, I don't have to live like this. I don't have to consume bad food if I want to live a healthy life. It just doesn't work like that. And then within that cure is that lesson, the lesson that you can really take and you can share with other people. So we covered characters, we've covered conflicts, we've covered cure. And then we're going to go right into the change. And the change is the process. It's the formula where you start to lay things out on what you did. So, how did you change? So if you were somebody, so one of the speakers that we had talked about how um, they were sitting at their desk and they were just tired of going into work doing the same thing every single day. And they asked themselves, as they're looking at this at a monitor, like we all do when we work in a corporate environment, is this what I want to do for the rest of my life? And the change was, no, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. And I'm going to switch. I'm going to do something else. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to set out a process. So when I make that transition out of this life, I can go do something else. So that's the big change in how you work through that change. What's better about your life now that you've gone through that change? And with this particular speaker, what we had is they switched from working in a good corporate environment to becoming an entrepreneur, and some of the struggles that they went through. And the best part of their life is now they're in a place where they could have never imagined they would be if they didn't make that change. And the formula for them was simple. It was just putting in the work every day to make sure that they built the client list so they can create this new entrepreneurial venture where they could be successful. But what you find, and this will be part of the delivery part, is the excitement. This is where you start to, you stand up a little bit taller, you get a little bit more excited about what you're talking about, because you realize that there are other options and opportunities for you because of this change. And, you got to ask yourself, what's the recipe in the change? How do you give, what I like to find is, how do I give my audience members a step-by-step? When I talk about my personal outsourcing story, my recipe is just helping other people. And it's really simple. My goal is to give back through a way that really betters other people's lives just by giving. And if you can change your life by giving just a little bit more, what can that do for you? And I can tell you, it can open up a whole bunch of different opportunities. And then ultimately, and this is where I find a lot of people struggle a little bit, is in their close. And what I found, the greatest storytellers out there, they do a really good job of closing their story by just summarizing what they've talked about or where they started and where they are today. They review the lessons that they've gone through, the wisdom that they've, learned from other mentors and coaches throughout their story, because those are the characters that really are adding the value to them. In their close, they show what is possible. And what I found, some of the best storytellers that I've seen are the people who show you what you lose if you don't take action or if you don't make a change. And I think about people who go through illnesses and people who neglect their health, and they end up living an unhealthy life, and at the end it's a struggle, and it's a really difficult moment and time for them. So if you can show your audience what they lose by not taking action, that'll prompt them to take action. And ultimately what you want your audience to do is to take action through your story. You want them to do something different that they haven't done before. And call to action is pretty much baked into everything that I do. And you'll see that at the end of this presentation. The call to action is to do something that you wouldn't do if I didn't tell you to do it. So that is story structure. So we talked about characters, we talked about conflicts, we talked about, I'm just going to review this real quick. We talked about cure, we talked about change, and then we talked about close. So that's the structure in terms of organizing and putting your story together. And really, when it comes to knowing your structure, now that you know your structure, your formula, and if you're a job seeker, we talk about using a STAR format, your situation, your task, your actions, and your results. These elements all fit into that. So for those of you that are listening in from that audience, you can know that you can take these particular elements and put them into your STAR story because they're just as important. The only difference is they're going to be a little bit more concise. And what this structure does, it actually helps you keep a concise structure to your story. So what I find is when people tell their stories, they just go off the handle because they put too much information in, or they don't put enough information in, and you don't understand what the premise of the story is. And it's like, okay, so what's the point of that? Or they just keep going forever and ever and ever. And what you want to do is you want to bring it all together. You want to keep it nice and tight so you can get your message across in a concise manner. So that's the structure. But how to practice successfully is what I'm going to go through next. So this is the second part of it. And this is all around packaging. So once you have your story, what you're going to do is, your delivery. So your delivery is just as important as your content. Actually, they say today, delivery, body language is about 93%, and content accounts for 7% of your total presentation, which I think is kind of crazy. But when you look at people who deliver and get their message across, and sometimes their message isn't the best message, but it is an effective message, they do it within the 7%. They do it within the 93%, not the 7%. And so it's a combination of balancing both. So when it comes to delivery, a couple of things we're going to do is we're going to write it out. We're going to do a table read of it. We're going to record it. We're going to improve and rewrite it. We're going to pressure test that. And I'm going to go through each of these sections individually. So when you write out your story, and people think, and I've been guilty of this as well, people think that you can wing a good story. And I'm here to tell you, yeah, if you're a really good storyteller and you've told your story a million times, yeah, you could probably wing it. But for the rest of us who aren't, the professional speaker, and those of us that are still learning, writing out your story is important. And actually, I had the opportunity to write my outsourcing story many, 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 many times. I wrote it because I wasn't overly comfortable with it. There were elements that I was missing. And this is the structure that I put together to put that story together. I looked at who my characters were in my story. So in my outsourcing story, I'm one of the characters. My former director is a character in my story. An employee of mine who I struggled with was a character in my story. And finally, the final character in the story was a mentor who said, just take the leap, do what you need to do so you can move forward. And because I knew those characters, I could now figure out what type of dialogue I wanted to have in those stories. So it's very important to write it out, making sure that within your story, you're covering your 5 C's. So you're looking at your characters, your conflict, your cure, you're looking at your change, and you're looking at the close. You're also putting vivid description into your word, into your story. And one of the things I find is when people are structuring and putting their stories together, they're not putting enough description to explain something. And I'll get into this just in a second, but painting pictures with your words is what people do with stories, and that's what makes it even better, because it brings you right into the story. It brings you right into visualizing the scene and putting yourself, your audience members, in that scene with you. And one of the things I do, and I'll give you an idea of what this looks like. When I talk about the outsourcing story, I start, and this is my opening scene, so I'll kind of run through it with you really quickly. I'm sitting in my car, my hands are on my steering wheel, and it's raining outside. I put the key in the ignition and I turn it, and my check engine light comes on, and I start to lose it. I start to cry wildly. There's tears coming down my face. I'm hitting the horn on the steering wheel, and I'm just losing it. This gentleman, as he's walking by, he hears the honking, he sees all the noise, he sees all the commotion in the car. He taps on my window. I roll it down, and he asks me, "Is everything okay?" I said, my check engine light is on. He goes, "Don't worry about it. There's a dealership right across the street. I'm sure they can help you." I say thank you to the gentleman, and he walks off. What he doesn't know is 2 weeks earlier, I was told I was going to lose my job. A week later, I was told that my marriage was going to end. And even a few days after that, I was losing my puppy because he was going with the ex. So that's the opening scene for my story. And it brings you right into, I don't know if you guys visualize it or could see it or could put yourselves there, but you start to see the picture of how that all starts to come together. Make sense? So painting the scene, and it brings your people right into the story. And when you write it out, you're covering all your key points. So a table read. So once you have your story written out and you have it laid out the way you want, you read it. And when actually a lot of actresses and actors, they do this before they actually get on set or they go on stage to do their performances. So they read through and they practice all their lines and they get it just right. And they listen to how they sound. So, and this is an important part, when you do your table read, and what I did earlier on when I was doing my public speaking is I would record all of my speeches as I was reading them. And then what I would do is I would play the back to myself in my car as I'm commuting, or if I'm commuting on the bus, on the subway, in my car, I can listen to myself, listen to the speech. And what that helped me do is figure out the elements that actually worked and the elements that didn't work, the things that resonated really well and the things that didn't resonate well, because you're actually listening to your speech. And I don't know how many of you out there actually do that. When you write out your speech, you deliver your speech, you listen to yourself deliver your speech, are you getting the right message across? And what I also try to do is I put myself, we call it second position. The second position is putting yourself in the shoes of your audience members. And you're listening to your speech, your story from their perspective. And is it coming across the way you want it to come across? And is it right? At the end of the day, if you're not getting the right message across, because if you're not getting the right message across, then you're not really delivering the message that you want, and then you got to go back and retweak it and change it and make it better. So this is why the table read is an important element of having your story written out, you're reading it out, and then really listening to it. And this is really important. So, and this is where you take the opportunity to go back and improve and rewrite it. Do you like it? Is your message clear? Are you getting across what you want to get across? One of our speakers, when he talked about transitioning from one country to another, his message was about hope. His message was about, overcoming the challenges that he was faced with. But one of the things that he did to prepare for the challenges was to do all this pre-work. So when he showed up, he was ready. His story is pretty successful too, because he came to Canada, he landed, and within 2 weeks, he had 3 job offers. And, I speak to a lot of people that are going through that type of transition, and having 3 job offers in 2 weeks is very rare. So, and he talks about his formula and how he did that and through the preparation that he did to be successful. So his message was very clear, be prepared for the challenges that you're going to face so you can overcome them quickly. The other thing it also does, as you're going through your speech and you're reading it and you're listening to it, you can figure out what words are fillers. And we all have those filler words. Actually, I'm sure I used a whole bunch of them, so hopefully you guys aren't counting my ums and ahs. There's a lot of filler words that I'm using today because I'm going through the process of just organizing this presentation. But within our speeches, especially if you're a new speaker or if you're going through the interview process, there's going to be all these filler words that you're going to use to extend your story, and it'll end up making your story bigger. So take out the filler words and only focus in on the key points that you want to talk about. Are your words vivid enough? Are they painting a picture like I did in when I just talked about my introduction for my speech? Are they painting a vivid picture? And if you're going through, whether you're looking for a job or if you're just telling a story to a group of friends or even family members, are you painting enough of a picture with your words that people can actually see it? And I find that the best storytellers, Obama is one of my favorites, when he tells his stories, he brings you right into the scene with him. But here's a secret to creating a good scene for a story. It's got to be generic enough. So it's got to be specific and generic. And let me explain this. It's got to be generic enough that I can actually see all the things that you see because they're common elements. So everybody can see a car, everybody can see a steering wheel, everybody can see a windshield, everybody can see raindrops. Those are all things that we've experienced at some point. If you haven't seen any of that stuff, then, you haven't seen any of that stuff. But, the majority of people have all seen those elements so they can relate to it and they can see it. When you get too specific, so you talk about, my brown steering wheel and my hands are at, 2 and 9 or 3 and 9, you don't want to provide so much detail that people start disconnecting from what you're telling them within the details of the story. You want to keep it generic enough that they can see it and they can picture it because it's something that they can relate to. But don't get so specific that, you're providing elements like color, you're providing elements like texture, because not everybody sees. It could be that you're speaking to people in your audience that are colorblind, so they don't know what color even looks like. They don't know what red looks like. They don't know what blue looks like. So you want to keep it specific and generic enough that people can put themselves in there. So this is why it's important to paint with your words. And the other thing is, as you're listening to your own speech, can you feel it? Is it really, resonating with you and giving you the message that you want? One of the things that prompted me to become and kind of pursue, not kind of, but to pursue the public speaking world is a speech that I watched of myself. It actually moved me to watch myself speak. And I realized, wow, like I really can make a change with the words that I use when I tell my stories. So, can you feel it as you're listening to your own speech? Is it moving you? And this is helping you get more into that second position and being in your audience's member's shoes to feel it from their perspective. And if you feel it, I can guarantee you they're going to feel it too. What you're going to do now that you have it written out, you've gone through it, you've listened to it, you want to record it. And recording it is really simple. Everybody has one of these today, I believe. Actually, if you don't have one of them, let me know. Everybody has one of these, or everybody should have access to one of these. So a phone I think it's one of the best inventions. It is a moving television set in your hand. And it's, for the first time in history, anybody can broadcast anything to the whole world. So when you're going through and you're preparing your story and you listen to it and you like it, record it. And actually, I record quite a few speeches. Actually, I record speeches all the time. I do videos on LinkedIn, and I share my message with people all the time. And what you do when you record it, you actually get to see yourself. You get to see your facial expressions. You get to see the movements that you make, your eye movements, your body language. It's one of the things I think we neglect to look at. What do we look like when we deliver our speeches? When we're nervous and we're not comfortable or not confident, what ends up happening is we close ourselves off and our message gets a little bit closed off. When you open up your body language, one of the things I learned from Mark Bowden, who's a body language expert, is, you open up your speech, you open up your hands, you open up your body language, your message gets across more effectively. So when you record your speeches, you get to see whether or not you're actually doing that. And, people have great stories, they're giving just enough description, enough details, but when they stand there, they're closing themselves off and you're missing some important elements within the speech. So recording it allows you to see what your expressions are like. When you talk about the conflict in your story, are you bringing your voice down? Are you talking and getting the message across that it was a really difficult moment? And then when you talk about the cure and the realization and the awakening and the awareness, is that coming through? Is that excitement coming through your voice, through your body language? Is everything, all working together? Because it's a complete package. And when you think about movies, if you had a movie that had a message that was all exciting and then, it was a dark scene, it was a dark color, and people weren't moving very much, it wouldn't tie in very well. Hopefully that makes sense. So you want to make sure that whatever you're saying is cognizant with the body movements that you have, and everything's kind of synced together. And one of the things too, it allows you to see is your pauses within your stories. So when you tell your stories, one of the things that people miss is they don't use enough pauses. Actually, today I'm probably not using enough pauses either. So, but one of the things that you want to do when you deliver your story is make sure that you give just enough of a pause so the message starts to sink in. And when you're rehearsing it on video, the way you would do it up on stage, you can see whether or not you're actually tied, if you're including enough pauses. And the other thing is when you have funny elements in your story that you're sharing, are you giving people enough time to laugh? And then pausing while they laugh and then continuing on your story. I find a lot of people when they have, new speakers, this is very common with new speakers, is when they deliver funny elements of their story, they'll deliver it, they'll get laughter, but they'll actually jump into the next line as people are laughing. So people miss that first part of it. So you got to make sure that as you listen to your story and you're watching yourself on video, are you giving yourself enough pauses so you can actually make and deepen your message even further? And then finally, now that you've done all this work, you've written out your story structure, you practice it on audio, you practice it on video. Now it's time to put it in front of your friends, your family, and get feedback. and I have a group. I'm lucky enough that I have a group, a good group of friends where I get to share my stories all the time, and I can rehearse them anytime I want. And what's really neat about these people is they will always give me, honest feedback. They'll tell me elements that worked, and even though what ends up happening is you get so deep into your story, you start to internalize it so much that either you're leaving things out or you're putting too much information in. So what I find by practicing in front of my good friends that I really respect their feedback, they tell me whether or not it works. And if it works, fantastic. If it doesn't work, then they'll tell me to go back and tweak it, make some small changes, and that's what I do. And I incorporate them. But as a speaker, as you deliver your stories, there's going to be a lot of people who give you a bunch of feedback. Some of it solicited, some of it not solicited. And for those of you that have been out there doing enough speeches, ultimately at some point somebody will walk up to you and say, well, it was a great speech, but you should do this differently. I know when I talk about leadership and I talk about having the right mindset, one of the things I do is in my speeches, I talk about not watching the news. And actually, for some reason, that really upsets one or two people in the room every single time. And what I inevitably get is somebody will come up to me and say, well, you can't say that. It's important to watch the news. So, why do you tell people not to watch the news? And then I go into my spiel and I tell them I respect their opinion and, I respect their feedback. But to me, I feel it's important not to ingest negative things. So watching the news is negative to me, so I don't watch the news. Anyways, they walk away, but inevitably, they tell me that I should make a change that I'm not really comfortable with because it's not residing with the values that I'm trying to get across in my presentation or my story. So I just leave it in. And this is important because people can give you feedback, but if it doesn't align with the message that you're trying to get across, stay true to yourself and leave it in. Just because somebody gives you feedback doesn't mean you need to incorporate that into your story. Make sense? So, so you're testing it in front of your friends, you're testing it in front of your family members, and family members sometimes are the hardest people to deliver speeches in front of. But it's a good way to see if, you're getting your message across. And you can even preface it. I know those of you that do the Toastmasters, what you can do is you can tell your evaluator, can you listen for this specifically and make sure that this comes across? And if it doesn't come across, let me know. Because that's, as you're progressing through and you're trying to become a better speaker, you want to make sure that there's elements that you're working on specifically to make you better. So you want to make sure that those elements are always covered. So whether it's something that you need to improve or something that you want to make sure that is right on point, especially with your message, that those elements are being captured. So just to review, so story elements, we talked about this. Characters, conflict, cure, change, callback. Not callback, it should be close. Forgot to update the slide. But these are the elements that make a good story. So as you're putting your story together, you're making sure that these 5 C's are in there. And then when it comes to delivery, you're making sure that you write it out, you do a table read of it, you record it, you improve, you rewrite it, and then you pressure test it. So what I want to do now is I want to open this up because we are now at about 1:15. I want to open it up to any questions that anybody may have. I believe I can unmute you guys. Give me a second here. Can you guys hear me? Everybody okay? Matthew, you still there?
Yes, I'm here. Hi.
Yeah, you got any questions, or does anybody have any questions? You can also put it into the chat.
Yeah, John, I do have a question about conflict.
Okay.
Can you explain more about it? Because I'm trying to understand how conflict will impact the story.
Okay, so a conflict is, so I'll give you an example. So one of the people, okay, conflict is this. One of the people who was going to switch, actually, I'll give you his name. His name's Connell, and Connell moved from Dubai to Canada to create a better life for his daughter. So in his story, when he looked at his conflict, the conflict was, do I stay in Dubai and, make a lot of money and, have this lavish lifestyle, or do I make that transition and move to Canada where my daughter can grow up free? right? Because one of the things that they don't have in Dubai is freedom for women. They're not equals. Everybody's different. And actually in his story, he talks about how when he arrived here, he realized the freedom that women had that people didn't have back in Dubai. So that the conflict was, do I, keep doing what I'm doing, or do I create better opportunity for my daughter? So what he ended up doing was making that move, and that conflict was, do I stay or do I go? And if I stay, she's not going to have those opportunities, and she's not going to grow up an equal. But wouldn't I want to do that? So that was the conflict that he used in his story. Other people have used, conflicts of, I could sit at my desk and keep doing what I'm doing, or do I, finally take that leap to go do something else with my life? And the conflict is, I could sit here, be bored and, make money, or I can be happy doing something else. And actually one of the people I've been working with, the conflict in her life was, I'm struggling financially, and, I could take a job just to get through it, but I won't be happy. Or do I struggle, be happy, and then, finally get to a point where I'm comfortable? So conflicts within a story can really vary depending on what your conflict is, but we all go through those elements of conflict. So my outsourcing story, my conflict was, I could sit here, I could brood, and I could just, look at the world negatively, or I could take this opportunity to really go do something bigger, better, and different with my life. Does that make sense? Does that kind of cover what you're looking for?
Yes. So more or less, it's like conflict resolution in your mind, like some type of logical. What do I do? And I see that it adds more value to the story because it lets people know what you're struggling with, like.
So absolutely. So it's that moment in your story where you really got to make that decision. And, indecision is also a decision. So by not taking action, you're also taking action. So when you take an action that scares you, or an action that you're not comfortable with, or an action that helps you step out of your box, that's the moment where things change. And that's really where you start to find the cure, because now you're looking for solutions to your conflict, right? Thanks, Matthew. Karen's also got a question. So she'd like to know, who's the one who controls the emotions while telling the story, telling a personal story. So ultimately, as a speaker of the story, you're always the one in control of the emotions of your audience. So you kind of make your audience, you can make your audience feel great. You can make them feel your pain. But ultimately, as you're going through your conflicts, your cure, your change, and your close, you want to make sure that you're carrying them to somewhere positive. At the end of your story, it's not about people feeling bad for you. And, you got to be really careful with that. You want to leave people on a high note. So whether you're delivering a story, you're doing a presentation, a speech, you're doing in an interview, everything has to, my personal opinion is everything has to end on a high note. And it's got to be a very positive message that people can change and do really good things with. Do you ask your audience for input while you tell your story? My opinion is, depends. I wouldn't ask them for, as I'm telling my story, I don't want input in my story. I want to tell my story, and then I can ask for input afterwards. One of the things I do when I go out and I do my speeches, especially with the Toastmasters, is I give people an evaluation form and I get feedback from them. And then I can, for my next, for the next version of my story, I can incorporate that feedback, or I can leave it out because I want to make sure that I stay genuine to myself. So yes, it would disrupt your story if you're asking for feedback while you tell your story. If you have a book that you want to promote within your story, when's the best time to bring it up? At the end. I talked about my book at the beginning. I'm not promoting my book here. I used it as a means to tell you what my story led me to. And I showed you the result of what that story is. But ultimately at the end is where you want to, if you're going to promote anything, your call to action, your promoting is your call to action. And you'll see what I'm talking about in a second as I get to my end of this presentation and this workshop and what that looks like. So I'm just going to throw it out to anybody else who's got any other questions. You have the chat option if the audio is not working for you. So you're welcome, Karen. Does anybody have any other questions? Okay, Mukesh, you say thanks too. All right, awesome. Um, all right, so if you don't have questions, that's great. By all means, you can always connect with me afterwards, and um, you can ask me questions. So I know we're getting near the end of our time. I'm going to go back to this. So next steps, and I talk about call to action in your story. Call to action should be in everything that you do, because you want to lead you want to lead your people somewhere. So next steps for you, if you're interested, is to listen to our speakers. We record, when we do our Fearless Voices events, we record every speaker that presents and does a speech. So there's a link in here, and I'll make sure I include the link when I do the follow-up message with everybody, that if you want to go see what that looks like and what those stories look like. I know some of you have actually attended our live events, so and you've heard these stories. But when you listen to them from this perspective, now that you have your structure and you know what the 5 C's are, you can understand the work that goes into the delivery when they get up on stage to deliver their presentation and their speech or their story. So definitely something you want to check out. Do you think I may be a part of this frame? Sorry, Mukesh, I don't quite understand your question. If you want to be a future speaker, we definitely have, there's a form that you can fill out to become a future Fearless Voices speaker. So that opportunity is there for everybody. Because like I said, it's about the community coming out and sharing their stories with everybody else. This is why we do it. And we want to make sure that those that apply, we give opportunity to. But we do get more applicants than we have slots, because every speaker event, there's only 6 speakers. So if you don't deliver in one Fearless Voices event, there could be a future one where you could deliver your story. One of the other options, so once you go through, you listen to your stories. One of the other next steps is to come out and actually check out our live event, which will be held on September 17th at Dave & Buster's, which is right across from the new Vaughan Metropolitan Subway. And what I'm going to do for all of you, because you all got up and I want to be respectful of the time that you gave me on Saturday morning, is I'm going to give everybody a $5 discount code for the event. And the code is I am fearless, because I believe you are all fearless and you all have a great story. So if you want to check that out, the link to the website, I will also make sure I include. So if you want to go in, it's through Eventbrite, and you just pick up your ticket there. And if you're looking for help specifically, so I know I've touched on a lot of different things. And really, I've been working on storytelling for the last, I've been a Toastmaster for 11 years. And I've been working really hard over the last 3 years, over 500 speeches to really refine and get my message down to where I wanted to get it. So it takes work. And, I've been privileged to work with some great coaches that have helped me create better stories. So if you too are looking for some help, I do provide private coaching. So, just reach out to me. There's an email address there so I can give you more information. And with that, I'm going to say thank you. Thank you for the time that you gave me today. We are right on time, actually 2 minutes early. It's 11:28. Thank you for joining me, and thank you for checking out my workshop today. If you got any questions, make sure to email them over to me, and I'll make sure I get some responses out to you. All right, everybody. With that, have a fantastic Saturday. Enjoy your weekend. Enjoy the beautiful weather, and hopefully we'll see you at the live event. Take care.